Thank you, Devaji. As always, it's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to share with you my problems, my objectives, what is going on in my mind, and how I see what is happening. Now, so before I come to the bitter bit, as they say, let me first make my bona fides clear. I speak for the developing world, but I speak as the minister of a country which has emerged as a leader in climate action. So when I say something in the latter half of my address, it's not to excuse my inaction, because I have not been inactive. Our country has not been inactive. In fact, we are already a leader in energy transition. So that will put things in proper perspective. As they say, it will clear our bona fides. Now, the present status insofar as the country is concerned is that 44% of our power generation capacity is from non-fossil sources. That means that in actual physical terms, about 180,000 plus megawatts, 180,700 odd megawatts is my non-fossil capacity. And it's 99.99% renewable. My nuclear capacity is just about 7,800 megawatts. The remaining is totally renewable. Now that constitutes 44% of my established capacity, which is 427 gigawatts, 427,000 megawatts, out of which 180,000 megawatts is renewable total. 44%, as I said, of my capacity is renewable. I had pledged that by 2030 we'll have 40% of our capacity is renewable. So I'm already beyond that. Again, we pledged in COP26 that by 2030 we'll have 50% of our capacity which will be non-fossils, mostly renewable. In fact, it will be 60%. In fact, it will be actually 65%. So I'll be way beyond what we pledged. Our per capita emissions are one of the lowest in the world. My per capita emissions are in the region of about 2 tons, 2.6 tons. The world average is about 6.8 tons. Despite that, we had pledged that we'll reduce our emissions intensity by 33% by 2030. We achieved that in 2019. And in Glasgow, we pledged that by 2030 we'll reduce our emissions intensity by 45%. So we'll achieve that. In sum, we are the only major economy which achieved both its NDCs way before time. Only major economy. And when neutral observers graded us, as they say, they categorized us as the only major economy whose energy transition actions are consonant with a sub 2 degree rise in global temperature. Grading is something I'll revert to later, because you have all types of funny figures coming out from funny organizations whose the provenance is in doubt. We need to have a transparent and a neutral system of grading in which India will emerge as number one. I have no doubt whatsoever. Now, this is what I have already established. I have 103,000 megawatts of renewable energy capacity under construction, non-fossil capacity, because that includes 8,000 megawatts of nuclear. 103,000 megawatts is under construction. I have 71,000 megawatts under bid. I don't know what the figures of China, but no other country would be matching that figure. We have our rate of energy transition, the speed of energy transition, scale of energy transition is perhaps unmatched. We are the only ones who have now issuing bids regularly for round-the-clock renewable energy. with solar, wind, hybrid and storage. We are the only country which is adding storage as a mission, so as to bring the price of storage down, so that we can transition fully away from fossils. We have that concern. I don't know whether any other country has that concern. Add volumes in storage, prices will come down. Add manufacturing capacities, prices will come down. We are doing that. We are adding manufacturing capacity also for lithium-ion batteries. We are adding capacity about 35,000 megawatts of pumped hydro. Add storage, have around the clock renewable energy, you can do away with fossil fuels. So all these are doing, all these things we are doing. So when I come to the next bit, it's not to excuse inaction, because I'm a leader, in taking action. But some facts need to be recognized, and we need to bring those facts into discourse. Now, what is the present status on our planet, the only planet which is inhabitable by Homo sapiens? The present status is that you have some countries which are developed. Their average per capita income, as per IMF figures, is about $58,700 per year. Then you have developing countries. Their average per capita income is $6,000, $6,770. That's IMF figures for you. Just imagine the disparity. Now, these developed countries developed using fossil fuels. And 77% of the legacy carbon dioxide load on our planet Earth was caused directly by the developed countries, 77%, which has led to this global rise in temperature by 1.1%. That never comes out in the discourse. Never comes out in the discourse. Our population comprises 17% of the world's population. We have been responsible for only 3%, mind you, 3% of the legacy carbon dioxide load. The rate at which the developed countries are spewing emissions, if they continue at this rate, the available space before we reach that 1.5 degree rise in temperature is just 4.5 years. But we don't see any signs of their reducing their pace of emission. Now, these people have developed. We need to develop. The developing countries need to develop. Now, that requires carbon space. For example, let me give my figures. My commercial building space will add 1 billion square meters by 2030. My residential building space will add about 3 billion. 3 billion, my memory is right. 3 billion square meters. Can you imagine the millions of tons of cement which I need to consume? And this is only the building sector, mind you. I'm not counting roads, I'm not counting dams, I'm not counting, the other structures. And the billions of tons of steel which I need to consume. And we shall do that. No country, the developed countries must realize that no country in the world is going to compromise on their development, no matter how many speeches you give. You occupied the space, now you need to vacate carbon space so that the developing countries can develop, because we need that space. And actually that carbon space can be vacated. As I said, the global per capita emissions average is 6.8 tons. Now let me read out the per capita emissions of some developed economies. Now, as far as I recall, the per capita emissions of the developed economies is about 4 times. Average per capita income emissions of developed economies is about 4 times the global average. 4 times. That's the rate at which they are still spewing carbon dioxide emissions. 4 times the global average. Now, nobody talks about this. You see, we've had so many COPs. The problem is with the discourse. The discourse is hypocritical. Because nobody talks about per capita emissions at all. And whereas that is the nub of the problem. That is the nub of the problem. Let's talk about per capita emissions. Who is spewing how much? Nobody talks about it. People talk about, to divert attention, they'll say that do away with coal. Now that's a red herring. It's a red herring because coal emits carbon dioxide, so does gas. So does everything else. Even biomass, if you burn it, it emits carbon dioxide. But nobody, so that's a diversion. The main thing is who is spewing how much per capita. And none of the cops have addressed this. Now, I don't say that the developing countries will develop on the same, carbon wasting, carbon dioxide emitting trajectory which the developed countries adopted, given, known. But for an alternative path to be taken by developing countries, not by us, we have enough money, thank you so much. But the other developing countries who actually don't have the money, they need access to finance. They need access to technology. And we've been hearing about, the developed countries providing access to finance and access to technology since Kyoto, and it has not happened. It has not happened. So just plain, simple, hypocrisy. Because without that, they cannot afford a trajectory of development which has been different, which will be different from what your trajectory was. It's plain and simple. You showed the way, but that's the only way right now for the developing countries. Nothing else is actually viable. You take storage. When we started adding storage, about a year back, 1.5 years back, the price was 10 rupees per kilowatt hour for 1 hour of storage. So you add volumes, the prices will come down. But that didn't happen. The developed countries, if they're actually serious, they would have added storage. That didn't happen. So we want a sustainable development. If we want sustainable development, that sustainable development has to be resting on two planks. One plank has to be that those who are emitting at a very rapid rate need to bring down the rates of emission. The second plank has to be that those who need to develop, those whose average per capita income is $6,000, $6,700, and who aspire to reach $58,000, they need to be assisted with technology and with finance. And we need to bring the price of the transition down, otherwise it won't come down. Now that's the nub of the problem, otherwise it won't happen. And you can keep talking about it till the cows come home. Basically the countries will develop as they are developing. Because nobody is going to make sacrifices which are unfair and which you are not willing to make. Now sacrifices will need to be made, but the per capita emissions will not come down otherwise. And we have spoken about that. Our Prime Minister has spoken about that. Lifestyle for environment. You can make do with 3 suits, whatever, or 4 suits, maybe 5 suits. Why do you need 20 suits, for God's sake? You can make do with 2 pairs of shoes, or maybe 3 pairs of shoes. Why do you need 20 pairs of shoes, for God's sake? Somebody tell me this. Somebody tell me this. You can't tell me this. But that's what's happening. You see, the whole model of consumption-led development, the capitalist model. So I don't want to say that communism is better. No, the communism has failed. But this model also needs to change, whereby we need to increase demand. All the economists will understand. Basically, the economy will carry on only when you increase demand. So the whole attempt is to increase demand through advertising, etc., increase consumption. That will spur the economy. That will keep the economy going. That will enable the rich people to actually become more rich. That is by the way. That's not my point. But that's the model of development. And if you have that model of development, then you will have increased consumption leading to increased emissions, unless and until we solve these problems of the hard-to-abate sectors. Steel becoming green, cement becoming green, mobility becoming green, cooking becoming green. We are trying. Our mobility is going green. We are trying to push it as fast as possible. It will go green. We have already the largest number of two-wheelers and green two-wheelers and three-wheelers in the world. We are exporting green two-wheelers, etc. And one of the fastest growths of four-wheelers, green four-wheelers. We have one of the largest capacities for manufacturing green hydrogen in the world. That's the quantum of, that is the capacity which is coming up, 7.8 million tons of green hydrogen manufacturing in our country. Because we make the cheapest renewable energy, so our green hydrogen is also the cheapest. But what do you have? I see protectionist barriers coming up in all the developed countries. And all those countries who spoke about the virtues of free trade and lectured the world about the virtues of free trade for how many decades? For, right since TERI invaded Japan. Know that history? What? For what? For the right to free trade. And right since the Opium War, when the British went to war against China, for the right to sell opium, mind you. So that was the virtues of free trade. We've been hearing that. But when you start, when other countries start becoming competitive, you put up barriers. It doesn't work. It won't work. That's not how sustainable development is going to happen. What is happening is that this race of ours, this Homo sapiens, are collectively galloping to a collective doom. Because, driven by self-interest and driven by narrow, short-sighted self-interest. I'll not, sacrifices need to be fine. I'll be the last to make sacrifices, or I'll make no sacrifices. That's the stand. That won't work. That won't work. You come with clean hands, clean hearts, and with a mission to actually reduce emissions, it will happen. But you can, try and change the discourse any number of times in any COP. It's not going to help. It's not going to help. You can keep talking about, how it's necessary to do away with coal or whatever. It's not going to help. It's not going to help. Ultimately, as I said, I have coal, I burn coal. You have gas, you burn gas, which also emits methane, which is 80 times worse than carbon dioxide. So there you are. Basically, and we of course remember what happened when we had a disruption in the gas supplies. Then suddenly, the narrative changed to how important energy security was. So let me tell you this, that energy security is absolutely important, and we are not going to compromise with it. Let me tell you this. But basically, we are still one of the lowest emitters in the world, and we'll remain that. We'll remain that because the pace at which we are transitioning, I think, is better than, faster than any other country. Thank you. I forgot to announce one thing. The Ministry of Power and New and Renewable Energy are getting into an agreement with your institution, TERI, for setting up an institute of energy on energy transition. So we will look to this institute to work out various pathways, alternative pathways for transition, identify the bottlenecks, and also the ways forward, the most viable ways forward. Right now, I am searching for ways. So, we are experimenting. So we came out with first solar, then vanilla wind, then we combined the two with hybrid, then we added storage so that it becomes round the clock. So that's how we are doing. Now I am coming out with a bid for round the clock renewable energy using green hydrogen as storage. Then I'll come out with a bid for round the clock energy using concentrated solar and molten salt as storage. So I'm trying different methods. Now if there were an institution which would study the various alternative paths which are available, that will make life easier for everybody else. So we'll contribute to that, Bhivaji. Thank you for reminding me, and we shall sign that MOU. Thank you.